seems the old ways still hold some power.
Come at me!
I am Mark Roberts and I am a game director on Path of Exile 2. Path of Exile 2 is a game where you start very immersed in the world and over time can grow to have the power of a god, wiping out screens and screens of monsters and creatures in this dark gothic horror world. And you can do all this through deep itemization systems and character builds and create any character you could ever hope to imagine. It's a whole lot of fun. Quite a lot of Path of Exile 2, or especially the Act 4 around the Karui archipelago, comes from New Zealand nature. And I've grown up here my whole life, and it's very, very pleasing to see so much of New Zealand's nature, like the trees, from the Pahurakawa through to the Nikau. We've got cabbage trees, all being represented in game. And from a creature perspective, since that's more my forte, we have a lot of the birds. So as critters you can find on these islands, you've got even the insects. You've got the New Zealand weta, you've got roas, which are based on the moa of New Zealand, and even things like the tui, which we just saw fly just past moments ago. You may think, well, how does that work in a dark horror gothic game? And where most of the game is to that style, we do break away from that a little bit and get you outside into exterior areas where it shows all this, only to then bring you right back into that gore and horror environment. Or we put interesting twists on it so that there is something sinister going on. Like one example with one of the islands we have in Act 4 is that, sure, the island seems super peaceful. It seems like this beautiful New Zealand island or Pacific island. Actually, though, there have been a bunch of the Karui people who have tried to settle there and they keep getting killed and eaten by something. What's happening is that these horrific siren creatures come out of the caves underneath the island at night and eat everyone. And all of a sudden now this very pristine, amazing island has this backstory to it that's just filled with, you know, monstrous atrocities. But it still allows us to get these beautiful trees and animals and all of this into the game, and it's just not something I've ever seen in any other game personally, and I think a lot of people are really going to appreciate that, and it's the second best thing to coming here in person, honestly.
So my name's Jonathan Rogers, and I'm the game director on Path of Exile 2. So one of the things I've really enjoyed when designing Path of Exile 2 is just being able to surprise team members by the kind of changes that we're willing to do. So when I suggested, hey, maybe we should have WASD controls for our characters as well as click to move, being willing to make those kind of changes to actually make the game better, I think is something that's going to, you know, really impress existing players as well as new players coming to the game who maybe thought they weren't interested in playing before. And one of the things we really wanted to make sure that we were doing with it is to make the action combat really, really excellent. We just want to make sure that anyone playing the game, you know, you can play it like an action game, feels fun to play. You know, we've added things like dodge rolls and like hack cancelling, things like this. And it just means that the game just feels a lot better than it previously did, as well as everything else that you'd expect from a sequel to Path of Exile.
One thing in particular that sets Path of Exile apart is obviously the depth, but in the itemization systems, crafting systems, but also the sheer number of quantity of monsters, encounters. Like, we have over a decade of content that is going to be available in Path of Exile 2 as well.
For Path of Exile 2, we really want to keep the mechanics from Path of Exile 1 that are great, but we can now have the opportunity to rebuild them or restructure them in a way that is easier to understand and much more accessible for someone coming at it for the first time, and keep that depth there, either hidden away or much more natural to understand.
I think there's a big difference between depth and complexity. Path of Exile 2 in some ways is less complicated than Path of Exile 1 because we've simplified the sort of technical complexity around doing things like the way you socket skills and things like that to make it easier to understand. But at the same time, we're making sure that we keep all the depth in terms of character options and things that you can do. So everything is still there as far as like, what can I do to build my character? It's just that it is easier to do so because you don't have to be worrying, for example, about when you're changing your items that you're going to break the way your skills are working and things like that. So I think that actually new and regular players can tolerate a lot of depth. It's the complexity that we want to try and avoid.
It's scarier to look at than it is to just start playing. If you start playing, you'll probably find you'll just have fun. But yes, we're not oversimplifying anything that the PoE 1 players very much love, which is being able to build your character and break the game is the thing I like to do.
So the dodge roll actually came about because we really wanted to be able to find a way to having some skills that took longer to do than other skills. But the problem with that is that skills feel really terrible if you start them and then you can't get out of them. So we really needed a way to make that interruption be possible, and the dodge roll was a really great way to do it. We actually already had a philosophy for Path of Exile 2 boss design where we wanted to make sure that everything was dodgeable. But previously we were just doing that by running around. But I think the dodge roll has actually changed a lot of things, especially because, you know, now that you can expect a player to be able to do that, it means that we can have the expectation and the balance as well.
We've done fresh design on everything. We've taken some elements from PoE 1 in terms of monsters, specific monsters, and brought them over and kind of, because they were fun to play. Like, why not replicate something that is still fun to play? But of course, it's full fresh coat of paint. There are definitely new systems. I'd say a lot of the monsters are faster, for example, which is where dodge roll helps to come into play. We have secondary AI systems that allow the monsters to do skills while they were performing another skill. Much like how a player can dodge roll to interrupt a skill, a monster can now do the same thing. We have a lot more monsters doing interactions with the environment. They'll interact with the world more. A lot more spawning from things, a lot more, like in one of our areas, the Isle of Kin, we have monsters riding on top of another monster, and then when they get close, they all jump off.
The skills in Path of Exile have a lot of synergy between them in a lot of different ways. We're not restricting ourselves to focusing on just cooldowns or just resources to build up and then use skills. A lot of situational dependent things, so you want to wait for the right moment to use the thing, you want to adapt the skills you're using to the situation you're in, or you want to be managing a combination of resources or some special mechanics, or whether you're on low health and taking advantage of that.
There are no skills where you feel like they're applicable to every single situation. You're going to want to sort of rotate between different things, and that's where all the kind of comboing and making sure that skills have interesting interactions together comes from. Also, when we're looking at support gems as well, when we're looking at things, we've got to say, okay, if this is a support gem that you could just put on every skill in your build, that means it's not a good support gem. They all need to have a very specific, this is going to work well with this skill that I want to use in this situation, as opposed to just something I just spam into each one. So there's a lot of design changes that have had to gone on to take into account the way that the new skill system works. But I mean, even just the more fundamental design changes we made, like the reason why we changed it so that every skill can be a 6-link is because if you don't do that, that really incentivizes you to have only 1 or 2 skills that are the ones you primarily use. By giving every skill that ability, it means you can have a skill that you just use occasionally. In PoE 2, we're just like, okay, what's every single barrier to being able to use a big variety of skills? Let's try and knock all those barriers down. And I think that as we approach each different character class, we're thinking like, how can we make the skills here feel so different than every other class? So with something like the Mercenary now, we're developing how crossbows should work. We kind of really looked at that and thought, okay, how can we make crossbows just feel completely different than bows? You know, if you look at a shooter, it's like pistols and shotguns and things like that. Like, what about those makes them different from each other? And so therefore, it makes the whole experience just feel so different than what a bow feels like now. You know, you want that like pull the trigger and it instantly fires, you know, that kind of instant response type of thing. And I think that as we approach each different character class, we're thinking like, how can we make the skills here feel so different than every other class?
Every weapon type really feels like a completely different playstyle. It's got a different feel to it. It's sometimes even got a different way of how it utilizes the controls of the skill system or the game mechanics themselves. And the really cool part is that you can mix and match them by having two different weapons and swap between two different playstyles, combine these things. Because they're all gems, they're never class locked. Even though each class has its built-in feel, it has the ability to change it up and mix it up and combine the mechanics in some ways that we haven't even predicted yet.
For each class, it's back to basics. Like, let's actually think about what makes this class fun to play, what kind of issues the players have, what annoys them, what can we do to address those kinds of concerns and make the gameplay just a lot better.
My personal favorite of the classes is definitely the Huntress, because her spear gameplay is a real fun mix of situational things of right now I want to be up close, now I want to get away and hit them with some spears from range.
I think really the Monk has been my favorite one, and I think the reason why is because it's the first class where I think we really nailed the kind of new feel of combat. We put a lot of effort into making sure that it feels fast, you're going in and out of combat, there's a lot going on, and it just felt so different than what we've done before.
It might actually be the Brute. Mostly that's because how it feels to play against bosses for me. It's got a very, very clean set of combos that are just very fun and satisfying to execute. It's the armor break, armor break, armor break, and then you get to, depending on a situation, decide how am I going to utilize this armor break? Am I going to leap in and do a stun? And if so, a heavy stun, and then the heavy stun goes off, and then I get to now decide, okay, how am I going to utilize that heavy stun? And so you're getting these moments where it's just, you're setting up a situation that could fork into multiple situations of choice, which can fork into multiple more situations of choice. Either way, it's very fun and very satisfying. For those who are wishing to join us for Path of Exile 2, visit our website at pathofexile2.com, wishlist us on Steam, and I'm looking forward for you to join us playing the beta in 2024.
The old magics, not to be feared, but to be extinguished.